January the 3rd, 1979, was a rather chilly day in Snohomish County, Washington, when a duck hunter left his home in hopes to begin his day by catching some good game. He was eager to capture a handsome number of ducks and fish when something strange caught his eye. There was something enmeshed in the fishnet on the mudflats along the shore. His interest was piqued and he went closer to check. As he inspected the scene, dread crept up his body. It was not what he'd expected. He'd found human remains. Whose remains were found that day? What could have happened to that person? Was it an accident or something far more sinister? Welcome back to Mysterious 7, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases from across the globe. Today we're looking into the heart-wrenching story of a boy who remained unnamed until his identity was finally revealed 44 years later. But first, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe and like buttons. Now, without any further ado, let's dive into the mystery. Snohomish County, where people don't walk by each other without saying hello, where the community is filled with friendship up to the brim, where its lush history and rich culture are embedded in every bit of architecture. Despite being the third most populous county in Washington state, Snohomish County provides a relaxing and small-town lifestyle with a fairly low crime rate. It exhibits its beauty with a wide array of picturesque landscapes, miles and miles of farmlands, and smiling faces of residents who enjoy experiencing the best of both worlds of comfort and stability. When the place is so inviting, simple, and laden with opportunities, it's often hard to believe that a mystery would emerge here that would take decades to reveal its secrets. The new year of 1979 was not kind to Snohomish County residents. It was freezing cold. The snowfall rate and the temperature broke all records. The entire Washington state was under a cold spell. But January 3rd, 1979 was different in more than one way. When the sun rose that morning, the residents heaved a sigh of relief. The air seemed to be warming above 0 degrees. It was the first day above freezing in a week, and people finally found it safe to venture out of their homes and experience a less bitter cold. With the same hope, a duck hunter set out to capture ample feral ducks to make a good profit. He arrived at the Snohomish River Delta at the western tip of North Spencer Island, where two sloughs bend and meet Puget Sound on its edge. His main focus was finding ducks when his eye caught a strange sight. On closer inspection, he realized that what he was looking at was, in fact, human remains. The police were immediately notified. As the officers arrived at the scene near Everett in Washington, they could not help a shiver go down their spine. The duck hunter's description had been hauntingly accurate. Tangled in a fishing line were a tan pair of fair khaki pants, a low quarterback leather shoe, and a partially skeletonized human leg bone. But that was not all there was to discover. When the duck hunter led the investigators a little towards the west, near a 12-foot-long fallen cedar log, they spotted a red, orange, white, and gray checkered shirt lying 5 feet away from a human skull, ribs, and another shoe with a foot still inside. It was a horrific and unsettling sight. When the officers checked the area to find additional clues, they recovered a leather wallet which survived the brackish water. But whatever was kept inside the wallet was long gone. There were no signs of a driver's license, cash, or fisherman's license in it. There was also a sock and a 33-34 size belt found at the site. As detectives sifted through the evidence, they noticed that the pair of shoes spotted there were laced and of size 8 or 8.5 and had the numbers 30 3/8 on it. But the shoes had O'Sullivan's logo printed on the rubber heel, while the tag on the khaki pants read, "Never needs ironing, made in the USA." These seemed to be particularly innocent details, but they could hold the entire key to identifying the nameless man. Although the case seemed complicated, it did not include any suspicion about foul play. It was hard to predict what had happened to the nameless man based on the remains. When the probe began, the investigators were met with a daunting task. The person had been dead for a long time, therefore chances of finding easy answers were slim. They sent the remains for autopsy to find out anything and everything that was available. They received confirmation from the coroner, who revealed that the remains belonged to a man who had been dead for months. It did not narrow down the prospects of finding the name of the man, but at least it was a start. The coroner's office pulled out all the stops to identify the man. They suggested charting his dental records and examining his body, hoping to yield the outcomes that they were seeking. However, the records could not withstand the ravages of time. Despite all efforts, the police could not ID him in the initial investigation of 1979. Therefore, the mystery of this unknown man became a John Doe investigation after Snohomish County's then coroner Robert Phillips labeled the man as John Doe 79-1 and wrote the cause of death to be undetermined. Due to sparse leads, there was hardly any possibility of finding the name of the 1979 John Doe. So, after waiting for about 2.5 months, the nameless man was buried in a pauper's grave at Cypress Memorial Park in the city of Everett on March 15, 1979. This practice is a thing of the past. Now, skeletal remains are kept in the medical examiner's office until they're claimed by a family member or are finally identified. Despite this, the scope of the investigation did not end there. They knew they had a long road ahead of them. Police, along with the entire community, were looking for leads to find out the identity of John Doe. Nonetheless, all the leads fizzled into nothing, and the detectives ended up considering the case cold. The case had been cold for decades, the trail long gone and the evidence all but forgotten. But then, a breakthrough occurred. The unlikely duo of advanced science and law enforcement resources came together to unlock a whole new world of justice. The once restrictive technologies and investigative techniques were no longer a barrier. 3 decades after 1979 brought about welcome changes. In 2008, cold cases like that of the 1979 John Doe came to light once again when Sheriff's Detective Jim Scharf and retired Superior Court Judge Ken Kausert reopened the old files that had been collecting dust for decades. When the case file of 1979 John Doe was studied after all those years, the detectives couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration. The data was scant and insufficient. They couldn't even determine if the original investigation had matched the description of the mystery man with any of the missing persons from that time period. They were left to wonder how many tips had been pursued and how many leads had been ruled out. They were faced with the sobering reality that the data had been lost before it could be digitized. However, the detectives refused to give up. In 2008, they launched an intensive investigation, scouring the old archives for any and all information that could piece together a picture of the deceased. About 36 years had passed since the man was discovered in the mudflats. It was now the year 2015, and investigators were still trailing behind in this case, looking for his identity. By this time, John and Jane Doe cases surged. Therefore, Snohomish County detectives gave John Doe 1979-1 a new nickname, Spencer Island John Doe. In the month of July 2015, the detectives asked the Snohomish County judge to permit them to exhume Spencer Island John Doe's body. After receiving the approval, they transported the body to the medical examiner's office, where a forensic odontologist, Dr. Kyle Tanaka, thought that uploading the man's dental charts to national databases would shed light on a few missing persons reports which could possibly turn out to be a match. But it did not yield promising results. The case was then uploaded to the NamUs database of missing persons in August 2015. Still, no leads came to light. The detectives continued to explore every possible avenue, leaving no stone unturned in their quest for truth. They gave another look at the evidence collected in the past, including his clothing, wallet, and belt, and determined that he wore second-hand clothes. The Snohomish County sheriffs pleaded with the residents to come forward with any information about the mystery man that they might have. Although an immediate identification was rather ambitious, the officers were almost at the tip of a major breakthrough when they received a lead in late 2015. It happened when the police received an unexpected tip that claimed that Spencer Island John Doe's description matched a missing farmhand in Marysville. After years, a promising tip landed on the detective's desk, so they had to pursue it. The man ran a fruit stand in Everett and was widely known to be a perpetual drunk. People recalled that he had a severe limp and disappeared around the late 1970s. The tip seemed promising, and the police were just a step away from the truth. After 1 month of hardcore sleuthing, they received a crushing blow after discovering a tombstone in Yuma, Arizona with the help of billiongraves.com. It belonged to the same farmhand whose tip they'd received. He died in 1981 on a trip to the southwestern desert region. In the face of the setback, the detectives couldn't help but feel the case was going nowhere. While they were making the rounds around the crime site, trying to piece together the information, the medical examiner's office made another set of major discoveries. They were able to find out some key characteristics of the man that could be considered definitive identity markers. In April 2016, Dr. Kathy Taylor, the Washington State forensic anthropologist at the King County Medical Examiner's Office, studied his exhumed bones. With her keen eye and years of experience in the field, she was able to provide a rough estimation of his age, which ranged approximately from 27 to 61 years old. She suspected his height to be 5'1" to 5'7". The forensic anthropologist's report noted that the Spencer Island John Doe had a Native American, Caucasian, or mixed heritage. Therefore, the police redirected their focus on missing person reports of people of tribal heritage and distributed bulletins to the Tulalip and Stillaguamish tribes. The information was too vast and vague to produce a coherent narrative. They sifted through mountains of data and learned that there were no signs of perimortem trauma, meaning the trauma or injury that occurred at or around the time of death. They concluded that as there were only healed injuries and no new ones. However, when medical examiners inspected the bones, they found a gruesome injury. The femur bone of his left leg had been horrifically shattered and left unset, causing him to walk with a painful and uneven gait. Based on the inspection of the bones, the reports also highlighted that Spencer Island John Doe might have suffered from temporomandibular joint syndrome, a painful condition that affects the jaw joint. In fact, he might have suffered in silence for years, as his injured femur did not seem to have ever received any medical attention. Medical officers examined the bone with the help of an X-ray that showed the middle third portion sticking out like the claw of an ice scraper, and it could be said with certainty that he would have suffered chronic pain. Detective Scharf said, "We've never seen a fracture that healed like that. It's almost like he was in a third world country, or he just avoided medical help altogether." Jane Jorgensen, an investigator at the medical examiner's office, seemed to be perplexed by the whole situation as there were no answers. After all, even if the man was homeless at the time of his death, he would surely still have gone to an emergency room for immediate care. It was not like he would have been asked to pay any amount. If the medical aid was ultimately free, why would someone have suffered such pain? He would have stood 2 inches shorter on his left leg. Spencer Island John Doe's femur became another mystery in this case. More disturbing details came up as the investigation continued. The study on exhumed remains disclosed that he was missing 2 left anterior top teeth and 2 molars. The sockets had been properly healed, indicating that he'd lost them before his death. He was believed to have a gap in his teeth and had alloy fillings in 3 teeth, which mysteriously indicated that he had access to medical care. The detectives were left with more questions than answers about the circumstances of both his life and his death. If he was able to have his teeth taken care of, why would he put off the urgent attention on his leg? The detectives were stumped, but soon reached the conclusion that he would have gone to a dentist in his childhood or teenage years when he was under his parents' care. As he got older, he might have avoided his healthcare needs. What made him bear the pain and neglect attention in his later years was still a question waiting to be answered. Now, the officers realized with a start that prisoners could get free dental treatment. So, could Spencer Island John Doe have been an inmate in the past? But the question did not make much sense and seemed half absurd. If that had been the case, somebody would have identified him by now because of his limp, gapped smile, and broken teeth would have made him memorable. The entire case was built on theories, and the officers knew that even the smallest details could hold the key to unlocking the truth. To find some answers, Jorgensen and Scharf met in the sheriff's office to discuss possible theories with retired Judge Kenneth Cowsert and retired parole supervisor Chuck Wright. It was proving to be a lot more difficult to identify the cause of his death. Given the condition of his remains, multiple theories sprang up. They assumed that he might not have any access to a doctor when he got his injury, but it seemed more like a desperate hunch than a legible theory. They suspected the nameless man had been a fisherman. It could explain his injury and why he might not have received medical aid. In fact, it could mean that he died on the boat and randomly washed up on shore. He could have been buried at sea by his sailor companions, and with time and erosion, his remains could have been swept down the river to the confluence of Steamboat and Union sloughs and ended up in the tide flats west of the railroad bridge that runs along State Road 529. Snohomish County sheriffs suspected that his death could have been a mere accident where he fell overboard and drowned around the resting place in the mud. The detectives had exhausted every lead, followed every clue, and interviewed every possible witness. They'd hit dead ends at every turn, but they refused to give up. In their last-ditch efforts to solve the mystery, they turned to the world of forensic art. In April 2016, forensic artist Natalie Murray rebuilt his face by gluing rubber pegs to his weathered skull and extrapolating what he could have looked like in life. Natalie noticed that he had flat cheeks and a narrow nasal passage. These characteristics were consistent with that of people of Asian heritage. But the bones had lost all the sharpness with time, so it was hard to sync this theory with the actual evidence. Undeterred, she extrapolated his lower jaw and imagined other features for the lack of a better alternative. Using her expertise, she created a sketch that would hopefully lead to a breakthrough in the case. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Kathy Taylor conducted an examination and confirmed that the sketch looked half Native American and half Caucasian as required. In 2018, a section of the right femur was sent to a national database at the University of North Texas, where the DNA was extracted to update the FBI's database, CODIS. The mtDNA and STR profiles were processed with the help of enriched DNA, which were ready by March 2019. In 2019, a retired police officer claimed that he saw a man in the 1970s who had a pronounced and awkward limp and looked like the sketch that was released. Despite getting all this information, the police were still without a name as the retired officer could not place a name. Snohomish County medical examiner investigators ruled out multiple missing persons by circumstances, STR testing, and dental records. When all these efforts did not yield any results, the detectives knew that they needed to approach the problem in a new and innovative way if they were to have any chance of success. In 2021, another piece of Spencer Island John Doe's femur was sent to Othram Labs, a private forensic genealogy company based in Texas. This initiative was funded by DNAsolves.com, which is an advocacy group that helps in promoting and funding DNA testing to help investigators and families to find the answers they'd been seeking for years and even decades. Months later, forensic-grade genome sequencing was successful in producing enough enriched DNA to create a profile. GEDmatch, a public genetic database, then allowed the police to find a match. The medical examiner's office, along with the detectives, built family trees and plugged the newly generated profile into Family Tree DNA, which is another public database site. Years and years of hope and prayers finally gave a positive outcome. They found a close enough match, and now the identity of Spencer Island John Doe was not too far. Medical examiner Jorgensen said, "It was like looking at 100 people versus 1,000 people." With the help of Adam Wilcoxon, the death investigator, the police were closing in on one name. Around 3 hours of desperate and hopeful efforts revealed a name: Gary Lee Haynie. They checked the family tree and reached out to his surviving half-sister, whose DNA turned out to be a match for biological half-siblings. And just like that, after 44 years, Snohomish County Medical Examiner Dr. Matt Lacey identified Spencer Island John Doe as Gary Lee Haynie on February the 10th, 2023. On September 23, 1950, 28-year-old Bernice Helen Schaefer and 37-year-old Joseph Dominique Condomiti gave birth to a baby boy in Topeka, Kansas. They named him Gary Joseph Condomiti. Just a few months later, his parents went through a divorce and Gary's life was about to take some major turns. Around 1955, Bernice, Gary's mother, married a military man named Sheldon Lee Haynie. Sheldon adopted Gary and legally changed his name to Gary Lee Haynie. He traveled the world with his new family, including his biological mother and adoptive father. He liked the Beatles and had an interest in and passion for playing piano. His family, however, recalled that he had some kind of mental disorder. While some people suspect that he could have been living with autism, other relatives claim that he was suffering from schizophrenia in adulthood. Gary's step-cousin, Hal Haynie, who's now 71 years old, said there was something that was amiss in his brain that caused people to notice. Sheldon, Gary's stepfather, completed his military service and worked for Boeing in the Air Force and moved a lot with his family from New York City to Kansas. When the family used to get together on holidays, the Haynies did not participate in that as they were too far away to become part of their family ritual. That's why Gary's relationship with his extended family was not well established. In fact, in the later years of his life, Gary simply disappeared from the family picture. At the age of 16, Gary lost his biological father Joseph, who died at Missouri Veterans Hospital. And within 3 years, his mother died too. So Sheldon, Gary's stepfather, brought him up. According to Social Security records list, in his later years, around 1976, when he was officially declared dead on the eve of Christmas of 1976, he was known to be living in some sort of rooming house. However, there was no way to know who had reported him dead. Although Gary's family did not get to meet with him that often, they grieved his sudden death. Hal Haynie, Gary's step-cousin, hardly met Gary twice in his life, as the Haynie family was always on the move. Haynie had been compiling family history on an ancestry website for many years. Therefore, he had ample resources to provide more data about Gary's life as a child and adult. However, what was shocking is that no one in Gary's extended family knew anything about his broken leg. It seemed that Gary's life had always been shrouded in mystery. In fact, Gary was declared legally dead in 1976, which is about 3 years before he was found on Spencer Island. Although the autopsy report highlighted that he'd been dead for months, 3 years is quite a long time, especially when Gary seemed to be completely off the radar. Nobody knew what happened to him in those 3 years, where he went, or how he died. Hal suspected that something might have transpired between them, and Gary might have been kicked out of the house or left on his own. We still don't know how he died, Haynie, Gary's cousin, said. He assumed that Gary could have met that fate with several things, which might include drowning or hitting his head on a rock or a medical emergency. Detectives now assumed that Gary lived with his stepfather in Everett, as Sheldon's place of residence had been in the same city from the 1970s till 1990. During his retirement, Sheldon was referred to as a snowbird because of his lifestyle. During the winter season, he used to reside in Baja California in Mexico after driving there. Around the mid-1980s, Sheldon visited his nephew, Hal Haynie, in Texas. But Gary was far from their topic of discussion, Hal said. There was never a conversation about Gary with him. It just never came up. Before his death in 1997, Sheldon Haynie lived in Oregon. The revelation that Sheldon never filed a missing persons report about Gary raised more than just suspicions. It opened the door to a whole host of new questions and possibilities. Why would someone not report their own son missing? Was Sheldon involved in Gary's disappearance, or was there something else going on? As the investigation continued, the detectives began to uncover a web of secrets and lies that had been hidden for years. They discovered that Gary's life had been far from easy, marked by tragedy, loss, and hardship. Despite not staying in touch, Hal Haynie released a quarterly newsletter with the help of his cousins who had been staying in various parts of the country, including Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. Talking about Gary, he said, "I felt a draw to do something about his gravesite. We're probably going to get the family to put a marker over wherever he gets reburied. But we have no relatives that live up there." The family had completely moved across the country, so even if there was a scant chance to visit Gary's grave, it would be closure for him as he remained nameless, familyless, and alone for 44 long years. Despite being identified after 4 decades, Gary Lee Haynie was still just as much of a mystery as he was in 1979 when his body was found, or earlier in his life when his family knew nothing about his life. The discovery of Gary's identity opened up a Pandora's box of new questions, leading investigators down a rabbit hole of confusion and uncertainty. Despite the progress they'd made in uncovering his past, they remained in the dark about his final days. Haynie, who had not even known how Gary looked after growing up, addressed his mysterious death and said, "This has opened up so many other questions, and I'll probably never really get answers." As the news of Gary's identity spread, there was a growing sense of hope that someone out there might have the missing piece of the puzzle, that crucial bit of information that could shed light on his mysterious disappearance and tragic death. What do you think happened to Gary Lee Haynie? Which theory about his broken leg bone do you find most plausible? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Until next time, stay safe and thanks for watching.